Dr. Paparone.
Okay.
It is my distinct honor to have him here today. And Dr. Paparone retired as an Army 06 logistician after an exceptional career. And after that, he started teaching at the Army War College. He then became the Dean of Logistics, and now works for National Defense University as a professor. He's going to address this in his presentation on Steel Thunder. Dr. Paparone is one of the few people who have studied the military design movement intensely, and from various angles, sociology, philosophy, operational art, has written a book on it. And one of the few that has done this. Now, there's a lot of articles, a lot of blogs, podcasts, all kinds of stuff out there. No one's really written a military design book. This guy has. And so having him here today is a great opportunity. And I'll also say that for the past 10 years, we have exchanged emails or communicated probably every other day, nonstop, on design.
With Grant?
With Grant. And it's in the collective, the hive here has grown since, 2009, 2010. It's a pretty amazing international group. But even today, there's the inner circle of emails that go back and forth. And so I'm very happy to say that Dr. Paparone has been an incredible mentor for me, a great writing partner, and most of all, a great friend. So, Dr. Paparone.
Yeah, thank you for having me, and thanks, Ben, for inviting me. I hope folks in the room realize what a national treasure Ben is. I mean, you don't realize that he has really taken the lead in an international community of design that I guess used to be led by my friend from Israel, but he kind of stepped out of it. But very positive relationship with an expanding bunch of folks that are getting associated with the design movement, so to speak. I apologize for my voice. I'm fighting a cold. What happens is I go home for the weekend, so from DC down to the Richmond area, and I see my grandson, okay, 2 years old, but he goes to daycare. So what happens? He has a cold, he comes home, he coughs in my face, I get the cold, and then 2 weeks later I get it back to him, he takes it back to just constant cycle. So I apologize. I have a cough drop in my mouth to try not to cough, but just trying to give you that warning. And thanks, Christy, for the key. Very well. So, yeah, thank you. First, I wanted to kind of give you the picture of our school. I don't know if you've ever been to Fort McNair, but it's this beautiful little peninsula in DC that sticks out over the Potomac. And I'm very fortunate. My office is right there. That's the Eisenhower School. And I have 2 windows, which is very unusual. Right? I have that corner office. So I am totally blessed. I have a beautiful office, fantastic school, and I really am thrilled to be part of the National Defense University. I just want just a little outreach here, but we have several colleges that maybe some of you aren't aware of. We have the College of Information and Cyberspace. Everybody aware of that? We have the College of International Security Affairs, which Fort Bragg has a campus for the soft guys. Of course, I'm from the Eisenhower School of National Security and Resource Strategy. And what we do is we link the students with economics, micro, macroeconomics, industry studies, and defense industry. So we used to be called the Industrial College of the Armed Forces, which I think is a better name. But some Navy admiral came in there and changed it. But anyway, I think the Industrial College of the Armed Forces is more descriptive of what we do. It's been around since the 1920s, when we blew it in terms of mobilization for World War I. And the War Department said we need a school that keeps us connected to industry. And so our students really a rigorous study. The first semester is a lot of economics, strategy, and the course that I'm going to talk about today, leadership course, which is really different from the normal PME course. And they're in the second semester now where they really delve deeply into industry analysis. They take businesses that are oriented on defense, and they really take them apart. They look at their economic situation, their finances, their leadership, the way they're organized. And they link that back to our national security strategy, our national military strategy, defense strategy, and see how they can better build relationships. So they try to understand the business way of thinking, which is tough because a lot of military guys have been around for 20 years in the military trying now to understand business culture. So really interesting curriculum. I think it's unique maybe in the world in terms of what the goals of that institution are. Then we have the Joint Forces Staff College at Norfolk. Some of you are probably graduates, GPE Phase 2. And also the JAWS program, the Advanced Warfighting program. And then we have the National War College, which is that beautiful building over to the left. Very prestigious, maybe arguably the most prestigious war college. I think Eisenhower School has better curriculum. Biased. And then we have other programs. For example, maybe you didn't know, we do Capstone and Keystone and Pinnacle. So we take the senior folks from the services who just become general flag officers, and we give them a course, a Capstone. Keystone is for senior NCOs that are taking positions in major commands, major units, and we have combatant commands. And then we have Pinnacle, which is associated with Joint Force Commanders, Joint Combined Force Commanders. So pretty extensive university in terms of its tentacles and what we do. We also have a couple of studies, kinds of research studies that are going on in here. I hope you can read that. It's a little cut off there at the top of it. Kind of want to get into my presentation now. This is a very different kind of thinking associated with how humans develop meaning in social, through social processes. The book Symbolic Interactions is kind of the basis for the thinking behind the design of the leadership course we now have at the Eisenhower School. So I've labeled this presentation as follows. And really, it's a case study. It's a case study in taking like a 180-degree turn in the idea of leadership and what it means. And it's associated with this idea of social construction theory, or how do we construct meaning. It's a very different kind of paradigm. It's certainly not traditional JPME or joint professional military education basis of understanding and logic. It's very different. I got to tell you that the commandant we had until last summer, he departed last summer, he was there for 1 year, very transformative Marine Corps general who came out of the field, F-18 guy. He's also a resource management kind of guy. But he went into the school for disruptive change. I mean, he was absolutely a disruptor. He was a 1-star when I met him, when I came to the university, and he left on the promotion list for 3-star in 1 year. So I just tell you, this guy's very dynamic. Was not set in his ways, in no way. He basically transformed every course we had and demanded that these courses be changed. At the expense of the so-called organizational climate. There's a tension between positive climate that Diomi measures and things like that about, are people happy at work? Well, if you're a disruptive person that demands a change, your climate survey is going to come out rather opposite of what you want, right? So I just thought you should keep that in the back of your mind, because this kind of change is not easy, and it takes its toll on the passion and the emotions of the people who work there. Tremendous impact, and I don't want to understate that. It is very, very, very difficult to have that kind of change in the 12-month period. However, as I stand back, I didn't see another way to do it. If you did incrementalism and just little changes here and there, I don't think you get there. But he was brave and bold. Obviously, his promotion did suffer. He was picked up for 3 stars. So the Marine Corps rewarded that, I guess. A remarkable serendipity that I kind of came into the university at the same time he was getting this change movement happening. And so at the same time, my department head was changing over. And so the guy who didn't like the current leadership curriculum came up to me, and I was in the leadership department, and he said, "You think we can come up with something totally brand new, start from scratch? Can you do this in the next 2 months before school starts?" So we were in June, July timeframe. Students came in August. Can you write the curriculum in 2 months? So I made the attempt, and we actually pulled it off. Some of the loose ends, we were still kind of doing the module 4 while we were in module 2 in execution. We were trying to stay ahead that way. It was very difficult because the faculty was oriented. A lot of our faculty were practitioner faculty. And as you know, in JPME programs, some of the instructors are coming in from the field. Some of our instructors are interagency. We have SESs that come from the Department of Energy, for example. They have the Department of Energy chair in our school. And they have to pick up this curriculum and deliver it. So it's a huge, huge challenge. So I kind of set the stage there, but this is kind of what the story I want to kind of relate here. All of these courses you see there at the bottom were adjusted in a big way. And his foundational sense of urgency was based in a book called Freedom's Forge by last name Herman, a historian who wrote about the transformation of industry from about 1939, before World War II commenced, that our industry transformed into a defense-oriented industry, producing airplanes, tanks, ships, primarily for Lend-Lease program, because the American people did not want to go to war. I think when this all started with industrial mobilization, there were only like 15% of Americans who thought we should get involved in overseas wars. So you can imagine the difficulty of getting these industry giants like GM, Kaiser, to switch the whole assembly lines over to tanks when the American people were saying, we don't want to go to war. Roosevelt had a huge challenge as a president. But the book was about industry giants who took charge, and amazingly, these very patriotic people transformed our industry, and really became the reason why we won the war, I think, because they were generating the systems, the weapon systems, and things like that, in quantities that just blew everybody. Everybody looked very small compared to what the United States was producing. So, in large part, I think this book proves that World War II was largely won by us because of our national industrial base that we were able to mobilize. So our school was worried, and he was worried, General Gantz was worried that we need to kind of recreate this sense of urgency. He says, think about us now or around 1939, and you're smelling a war coming, but no one wants to admit it. And so he rejuvenated the school around the idea of mobilization, the idea that we need to get serious about this stuff. In the school for 20 years, I'd kind of gotten into a pattern that was, as you know, what happens with bureaucracies, right? They get into a pattern, groupthink, and he wanted to change all that because he was concerned that we were not producing our graduates that were going to be able to lead the mobilization. You can see up there, we're an accredited master's degree program. About 300 students a year. He also created a a program to bring in industry student fellows. So there are now an increasing number over the next few years of industry fellows from business that will be sitting next to military and other agency folks in the seminar rooms. Think about that. That's pretty amazing. And what he did, he had to work to get the tuition changed. It was like $100 and something thousand to send an industry person to school with us, which was, you know, the industry's going, I'm gonna send him to MIT. Why would I want to send him to you? So he got it lowered to like 24,000, which is much more attractive. And so we're getting a lot more bites now from folks like General Dynamics and organizations like that. So pretty interesting change process. I mean, this is a great case study in disruptive change. I wouldn't say there are lessons learned because everything's going to be different associated with each different organization, but I thought the story is important. So, you know, my new chair in July, he took the chair in July. He appointed me course director in July and says, build the course. So the word design is not really used around NDU, honestly. So there was a little bit of covert operation here in terms of design of the course. But all the things that Ben talks about and Grant has written about and others have written about really came to mind in the idea of how do I develop a course that people are going to have a hard time associating with leadership. And sure enough, I'll tell you the whole story here. But these are the design features that I used, and I think they're very familiar to Ben in his program here. So reframing is really important. And there's a lot of problems with the way we think we're reframing, especially in military concepts of business. We really just say the same thing in different words. I don't want to give you the fancy word for that. We tend to use synonyms for the same concepts that we've had before. And I've written on this, you know, the idea of combined arms maneuver has been around since Napoleon, and we really haven't gotten off of it. It's the same idea, same logic, we just call it something different. So reframing is an important part of the course. How do you get folks to realize that their frames are rigid? How do you make them aware of their frames that they use? And that's you know, it sounds like it's pretty simple, but it's not. It's very difficult. You're challenged with that all the time in your courses and the way you approach. Values paradox. We're not aware of our ideologies that we carry around with us. We see that in the news every day now, right? Is it a wall or is it a barrier? And this idea of these relationships between big social values like security, national security versus liberty, market forces, free market versus equity, social equity. All of these big values are all always competing in our system. And yet, you know, the idea that ideologists don't realize they're lying. You know, they're the last ones to understand that they're lying because they believe the truth is what they believe. So this idea of getting the students to think about paradoxes and values, that simultaneous values exist, and it's a matter of degree, it's a matter of politics and how that works. The idea of multi-paradigm, although the course was designed in the interpretive mode, interpretive paradigm, you can't understand the interpretive paradigm unless you understand other paradigms. So we get into the idea of radical structuralism, radical humanism, from kind of an obtuse way. We don't just directly get them into that. We talk about frames that get into those logics, and they may not even be aware that that's what we're doing. We're talking about multi-paradigms. And then finally, why? Why this course? And so the idea of leadership, or the ideal of leadership in the military, professional military education, has not been this idea of leading policy change. But our school is all about policy change. And so when we talk about leadership, we talk about how do you influence policymaking. And that's something that particularly the military culture does not like to talk about politics. We like to talk about rational decision-making, course of action analysis, optimizing resources, things like that. So we have that kind of functionalist view of everything should function together, like they say, a machine. Machine metaphors are dominant in the military. So this idea of getting involved in politics is not really an acceptable ideal in the military. Those are where the military uniform. But we thought if we're going to mobilize this nation to go to war, we need folks in uniform and our other interagency partners who attend this course to be more familiar with politics and understand how politics works. It's not a rational decision-making process. It's a political decision-making process. And these competing values come to play. So we organize the course around these ideas. Here's an idea of an interpretivist view from somebody in the policy arena, policy theory arena. I'll let you read that. Now, Professor Yano has not really associated her writings with defense. She and her community tend to be left-leaning and find it hard to connect what they do with defense policy. But I did contact her, and she actually opened her arms and said, join our community of discussion and things like that. She didn't hesitate, so I really appreciated that. And started delving into who did she know in the defense community? Did she know anybody in the defense community that was using the interpretive mode for policy analysis, policy making? And she didn't know of anybody, but she opened me up to her community, and I got a hit. Her name was Catherine, last name. Yeah, I just introduced her to Grant this morning. But anyway, she is a professor at Fort Bragg in one of our programs, and she is an interpretive policy professor, which I thought was intriguing. Why is she at Fort Bragg? How did she happen to get there? Talked to her on the phone, and we have kind of a working relationship. So there was somebody in the defense community. Okay, so my on time, we're going to half an hour. Okay. So when I was a associate professor at the Command and General Staff College for Army, I was leading staff groups or seminars through what we call critical thinking. So we had a critical thinking few lessons, and we were using the Paul and Elder book to say that if you don't use these values as your values of deciding whether or not you're critical thinking, you're not critical thinking. And as I had these discussions with the students, really what this is scientific thinking, right? You're trying to get to the truth, the unbiased facts, et cetera, et cetera. Well, this didn't satisfy the students too much, because a lot of them were coming out of the box. They were coming out of Afghanistan, they're coming out of Iraq, and they're saying, really? You expect me to make sense of situations in this village in Iraq or Afghanistan using these standards of understanding? And they said, this is just not going to happen. We can't get there. So it got me to thinking that we needed something else that was really different. And it wasn't really fair to put these standards on them and saying, if you're not using these standards in your essays and your writings in the course, you're failing. And I just didn't accept that. And so I wrote an article, which is quoted down there at the bottom, 2 Faces of Critical Thinking. And so what I did was I said, okay, what are the opposites of those standards on the right side? I want you to look at that for a second. So I think the situations they were facing were much more on the right side than were on the left side. So that's the best we can do, is to teach them the sense making associated with the left side. And I just thought that was inadequate. And they thought it was inadequate. So I secretly started teaching this stuff and testing it out with them. And by the way, you have to be sneaky at PME to do stuff like this. Because generally speaking, you are expected to stick to the script. And here's your so by, go execute. Right? So this is another problem with JPME and PME in general, is that there's not a lot of opportunity for innovation inside of the seminar that at least gets published or at least gets out. So I published this. I decided to. So what I found was there's this indeterminate zone of practice that really gets on with the way people really operate when they go into these strange situations and deal with strange events. They have to sense make, they have to make sense of them, they have to figure them out, which is an interpretive process, not a scientific process. That's the argument. By the way, stop me if you have any comments or questions. I'll be happy to entertain. And by the way, this idea of indeterminate zone of practice is associated with the writings of Donald Shern. And Donald Shern wrote a beautiful book called The Reflective Practitioner, How Professionals Think in Action. And he also wrote a follow-on book called Educating the Reflective Practitioner. So definitely an interpretivist type of education foundation or philosophy that comes from Donald Shern. So I built on his ideas. So getting back to the course design then for the leadership course, I wish you could see that up top there, but it's kind of a statement of saying that we should graduate students who are comfortable with both sides. In other words, they can apply the science of economics, the science of macroeconomics, the science of the acquisition, procurement kinds of processes and things like that. At the same time, they have to be comfortable on the right side. So I came up with this idea of kind of a yin-yang approach to our overall curriculum in the school. And what I hope to add was a leadership course that pulled them to the right, the artistry side, while they were simultaneously attending other classes with the left. If that makes any sense. So I came up with this chart and showed this to my colleagues, to my other faculty members who looked at me cross-eyed. But my chair loved it, right? Once again, serendipity. I have a chair that is very supportive. He says, yeah, this sounds very cool. So the left side looks like that to us in Eisenhower School. We want stability, predictability, isolatability of variables and things like that. And we want transparency so we're kind of scientific in how we write about it, how we present it. And we have a certain philosophy associated with it. The idea that you can have objective views of the world. You create knowledge that works and it's repeatable, and that you can use it over and over again. I think we call it lessons learned and best practices. Tends to be things that we talk about. Operations research systems analysis tends to be a very important science to that end. And I would say that the ORSA kinds of science dominates the Pentagon, and how the Pentagon does analysis and how it looks at policy change. So the key theory is economic rationality, or rationality is an approach to decision making. Rationality is an approach to almost everything. Even now, as we fight wars, we're looking for feedback loops, right? So we're very systematic in how we exercise warfare, and then we look for feedback loops to say, are we doing okay? Are we doing okay? It's kind of a cybernetic view of warfare. I think some have called it effects-based operations, where it was outlawed by JFCOM years ago, but it never disappeared. They're still effects-based. So the idea is that you look at war as a system, and as you do things, you're looking for response. And you then steer your war type activities associated with that response and feedback. On the other side of this continuum, it seeks to say, like the right side of the previous chart, you really have to deal with that volatility, uncertainty, complexity we call VUCA, spelled VUCA, and it's much more subjective. It involves interpretation, involves sense making. If any of you ever read Carl Weick, I know that you cite him a lot. He's the sense making guy. He's the guy who's the Mr. Interpretive situations and things. And there are different methods associated with that. If you look over there, phenomenology. I mean, when's the last time we talked about phenomenology in the PME program, or hermeneutics, the interpretation of text? And if I'm not mistaken, you're doing your dissertation grant on the hermeneutic kind of model of interpretation, which is pretty awesome. And the idea of critical studies, improvisational learning, and unlearning. Unlearning becomes really important because you carry around these frames of reference that you make sense of the world, and you don't know that that's blocking you from seeing things in other ways. So reframing becomes really important. Notice the problematizing part there, and it talks about, on the right side, you focus on the uniqueness of the situation. On the left side, you're focused on the repeatability of the situation, like the scientific approach. If I do what I did before, it'll work again, is the left side. The right side says every situation is unique, and you have to be more artful. And if you look at art, right, how artists seek uniqueness in their work and present something that's very different from any other piece of art. So it's kind of a value system. It's kind of foreign to the military concept. So as the left side, wants to look for those best practices and lessons learned, the right side deals with indeterminate zones of practice. Because they're unique, and they have to develop knowledge to deal with those situations, not use past knowledge. They might improvise off old knowledge, but not necessarily. Getting to the design of the course, developed a curriculum based on 4 major books, and the students have to read books cover to cover. It's not that. What I noticed throughout my association with PME and JPME over the last 20 years is we tend to chunk things, like every lesson. Okay, now you're done with that lesson. Go to the next lesson. Now study that. We'll have a little exercise in the classroom. Okay, you're done with that. Now let's go on to this one. We're going to build skills, SKAs, so to speak. We're going to functionalize everything. So by the time it all adds up at the end, you're now a graduate and you're capable of doing all those things. Thinking that those individual functional lessons will all add up to what you want at the end of the day. This is very different. This says that you have to stick to these deeper meanings in these books to really study the author's intent, how they take you through different ways of thinking, and then through cases within those books. So you have consistency, and you have kind of an association with a new way of thinking, a new way of developing your own learning style. It's really about changing your learning style. These 3 books, the first one, the second one, the third one, the Policy Paradigm, are all interpretive writers. So they're not the scientific kinds of writers. very descriptive theory, very takes you down different pathways of thinking. The last book is a case study. So we devote 4 lessons to the detailed case study associated with industrial engineering, introduction of industrial engineering to our depots and our arsenals back at the turn of the last century. And why do we choose that? Well, if you think about it, that paradigm, that logic, the functionality of Taylorism. Frederick Taylor was the guy who created this idea of scientific management, but really was industrial engineering. And you can engineer your way to success. And it's been very powerful and very successful. I mean, it's really what got us through mobilization in World War II is this idea of industrial, using the industrial model, and the machine-like model of reproducing. So when you bring 8 million people on board into the United States Army during World War II, you have a process that creates sameness. And you want the same quality of soldier at the end of the assembly line to go into the division and then send the division into war. So that mobilization assembly line type approach has been very successful in our previous century's warfare. But the idea there is to show them that that was an ideology, to show them that that was a belief system. And the struggle associated with bringing that system, that whole way of new logic into our arsenals, I thought would resonate with the students saying that are we due for another major change? And then how are our folks going to react? Because it was a very, very challenging time because most of the arsenals were, the workers at the arsenals were craftspeople. They were craftsmen that worked their artistry. And every gun tube that was created was a little different from the previous one. But they would make it work and they would make the parts come together. Now you're talking about an assembly line, everything's the same approach, and it caused huge social problems. There were strikes, there were congressional inquiries, there were all kinds of politics involved in changing this policy associated with how we're going to operate. But in the end, this logic permeated then the whole military, and we became oriented on mass production, and the idea of mobilization became a mass production problem. Well, we're kind of in boutique wars now. This idea of mass production may not be the way to go, hence design. Hence this idea of designing for the uniqueness of the situation. So, once again, we overlaid our design features on top, actually laid the course on top of these design features. And I think we hit pretty good on all cylinders there. I'm using machine metaphor. So we also had to approach the faculty because that was the biggest challenge. Is to say how do you create a faculty in very short order that was comfortable with this way of thinking, this way of teaching, and that was the biggest challenge. And in fact, it didn't really work. Well, about 30% of the faculty were okay with it. But to be honest, there was about 2/3 that hated the idea and they thought it was awful. They said we're getting away from true leadership. We're not really creating strategic leaders. And they were just overwhelmed with just disagreement and anger at anger that we were doing. Absolute anger. We had 5 Title X faculty, which were PhDs. And we had the rest of them were practitioners. They were folks in uniform for their 3-year tour at Eisenhower. 2 of our Title X that had been there for quite a while and had been, basically accustomed to the old style leadership course, resigned. One resigned and one retired immediately. That's how much of an impact this change had. It was, for me, it also was an emotional roller coaster because the pushback was not just from the faculty, but can you imagine the students coming in from their culture, their institution, getting hit with this and saying, this is leadership, this is a leadership course. Many of them, in analysis of when we did the surveys at the end of the course, there were about 1/3 of the students who said, this is not, in fact, I'm probably getting ahead of myself here. Let me get to some of their statements in a minute. But let me just show you some of the design features and faculty development that we tried to help them be able to deliver this course. One was, we said that the seminar is not a teaching venue. You don't stand up and teach. The seminar is a facilitated, your role is a facilitator. And so it is a practicum for reflective practice. Remember I talked about indeterminate zones of practice. It's an opportunity for them to try to figure out things using the readings and then bring it home to what they're experiencing today, what their past, their recent experience has been, to make sense of it differently. I copied Ben's approach. You do it for your students, the filmettes that you do. The classroom. What I did was I did it for the faculty. I said, okay, I need to show them the underpinning philosophy here, what we're trying to do through a series of films. And they had to watch on their own. I think probably half of them did. Half of them refused to watch them, I'll be honest with you. And the last innovation was developed by my boss, my chair, who's an excellent educator. I mean, the guy is amazing. He says, what we have to do is give them a facilitation clock. So we have 90 minutes in each lesson. We need to show them that over the time, how should they lead conversation? How should they adjust their questions? How should they ask probing questions? So, he knew that there were those who were comfortable doing it anyway. They didn't need such a thing. He was doing this for those who were coming from the field and saying, I don't know how to approach this course. I don't know where I'm supposed to even start. So he came up with this idea of the facilitation clock. So here's a typical lesson. And you can see it's a 9-minute clock. There's a central theme in the middle. It says, you can always come back to that for that particular lesson. And by the way, that theme might be over 5 or 6 lessons. So you stay focused on that. But at the same time, you want to ask probing questions. We call them hockey pucks, by the way. Throw a hockey puck out and let them stir it. And so this is guided discussion. And this was our way of helping the faculty basically execute the course. I thought it was a great innovation. So the reaction, I think I already talked a little bit about this. About 1/3 were visibly upset. And that includes students and faculty. The students who totally rejected this stopped reading the book. I refuse to read this. Particularly the Stone book, Policy Paradox. She's an interpretive policy writer. I think her descriptive theory is amazing. It gets away from the naivety that we teach in terms of rationality and our rational approaches to decision making. And she says, I'm going to compare that with how politics works. Totally different. And it's a great book, but she tends to use examples in her book that are a little bit left of center, like when she talks about healthcare policy and things like that. She uses Obamacare, and you can tell that she's kind of pro-Obamacare. So some of my students said this is leftist propaganda, and stop reading. No kidding. Okay, and you can tell by the fear they were furious when they were writing up their comments. I mean, some of them were like this long in the student reports. Just absolutely amazing. They were very pissed off. They were just pissed off. Like, what's this got to do with leadership? This is the worst leadership course I ever had. It has nothing to do with leadership, and you're trying to change my mind toward leftist kinds of politics. There was 1/3 that says nothing. They were just went through the course and said, well, done. check that block, kind of get that course. And then there were about 1/3 that really liked the course and thought it was the most transformative course they've had in PME. And I think it was interesting. I think at the top of that group were interagency folks. They weren't DoD. They were interagency. They were other agency fellows. So, for example, Department of State kind of embraced the idea. And it made sense to them more, I think, because of the way they deal with their jobs. It's very interpretive. They have to kind of live in each country and not just assume that what they know in the last job applies here. So they were okay with that. I also found folks in the intelligence community like the course, which I'm trying to still make sense of that, but I think I think it has to do with they realized that after the problems they were having with groupthink and the problems they were having interpreting what was going on in Iraq, back in 2000 timeframe, 2001, 2002, that their community really took an issue with how they thought about things, and they developed things like red teaming approach, things like that. I think they were more open to these ideas. And this is just my own interpretation of it. It's not science here.
Did you see a pattern with soft students?
We didn't do that kind of depth of analysis, although I had a Croatian special forces officer in my seminar who was fine with it. Yes.
Did you have a sense of how industry folks feel about it? Or did you have any more?
Well, we only had 3 industry folks in this class, so I didn't have any in my seminar, so I can't really comment on it. But as we get more and more, we're going to start segmenting that out and see what they But let's face it, the business community is still very quantitatively oriented. When they look at their progress reports, it's usually economic based, finance based. So I don't know how to react on this.
Hey folks, we're going to switch to the Q&A portion right now, and we're going to spend about 20 minutes. Ask Dr. Paparone whatever you want. We only ask that if you push the microphone in front of you, we'll be able to capture it, because we are going to cast this onto YouTube after it's vetted.
And that was my last slide.
I looked at it. Perfect time. So 20 minutes of this, then we're going to do a break. We have donuts and snacks in the back here, and you can recharge your coffee if you want to stay for the next lecture after this. But for the next 20 minutes till 10:10, please.
If I could save 5 minutes too at the end, if you could tell me.
Absolutely.
I got back from Ukraine Friday, and helping some Ukrainian National Defense University. And I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about my observations there and my what I saw and kind of what's going on. It's very interesting what's happening in Ukraine. So hopefully I have 5 minutes at the end.
I'll start off. So, Chris, I'd be interested in your comments about dealing with students and the subject of multiple paradigms. So my experience, whenever I talk multiple paradigms to most people in the military, I'm talking to people who have never questioned their paradigm. And they assume their paradigm is objective truth, or at least the best paradigm that's out there, and they don't recognize it as a paradigm. And so it's very difficult to get over that, much less to multi-paradigms. I was wondering how you guys address that.
We didn't talk about multiple paradigms, we talked about multiple images. Because the Images of Organization book was about 8 different, if you know the history of the guy who wrote it, Gareth Morgan, you know he also wrote a book on sociological paradigms. So he was taking that underpinning and bringing it into something that would be useful to businesses and other organizations to understand themselves, understand how they might see things, and how there's different logic associated with various paradigms and how they see the world. So he wrote this book, a very clever book, in my view, of 8 different views of organization, how organizations see the world views. And so we took them through that journey without telling them we were talking about multiple paradigms. I didn't talk about design in the course, and I didn't talk about multiple paradigms. We used the term framing, that we said multiple frames of reference, because that was more communicative to them. And we talked about frame rigidity, frame awareness, and frame innovation. We said if you're aware of your frames, that's the only, it's kind of like an alcohol, you're an alcoholic. You gotta admit you're an alcoholic first. So you have to admit you have frames of reference. Then you have to say, are my frames rigid to the point where I can't see things in other ways? And these are in the lesson objectives. And then thirdly, how can I see things really differently than what I'm used to and see the value of doing that? Interpreting things from a wholly different point of view. Different set of variables and frameworks that are foreign to me. But I can at least temporarily suspend my disbelief in those other ways of seeing. Trying to remember who said, a way of seeing is a way of not seeing. So we use that in the course as well. And the author is very good about tying it all together at the end of the book where he says, if you use 2 or more of these frames of reference in looking at the organization, how it sees the world, you're going to be at an advantage. It's going to be a competitive advantage than if you just see it one way. And he takes you through a case study where this organization could be interpreted in how they were seeing the world and how they saw success, how they saw their competition with other organizations. Was quite different, and they had a different interpretation from each angle, from each point of view. Does that help answer the question? So Images of Organization was our main book for that. Any other questions or comments? Yes.
Did you feel compelled to iterate your course after seeing the feedback, only a third of which being positive in for-profit university? That would be on the low end of an NPS, and it would drive the need to make iteration of student base at NPS.
Yeah, the jury's still out. My boss is now leading the faculty. In fact, it's an opportune time for me to be away because I'm not in the room. But he's leading what's called the ADDIE process. I don't know if you ever heard of that. That's the curriculum development process that a lot of institutions use. It ends with a need, with evaluation. You know, how does so he's sitting down with the faculty and he's going through these evaluative sessions, saying, you know, what were your objections or what were your positives about the course? And this will, coupled with the student feedback, you know, what can we do to improve or change the course? I say the jury is out because General Jansen went on, right? He left. And we have a new commandant who was given the mission of restoring the climate, the morale of the institution. As you imagine, the disruption caused morale problem. So the president said, your mission, Provost. Provost said, your mission is go there and improve climate. So you're a general officer, you're 1-star, what are you going to do? Are you going to focus on radical change, or are you going to focus on morale of the faculty? Given those orders. You know what the answer is. So the problem becomes now of consistency and continuity. How do we continue this march into change when the pattern of the hierarchy in terms of guidance has changed? We're not willing to live with this disruptive morale while we're changing because they want to get back to stability. Remember this, the left side of the chart which says stability, predictability, you know, nice, serene kind of environment. That's the goal now. So I don't know how this is going to turn out. This whole course could be just totally thrown out and go back to the old course. And but I thought it was interesting enough to tell you what the story was. And maybe I can continue to keep Ben informed of what's going on at the school and help let you all know. I would think that JSOU, in particular, should look at this as a case, not necessarily a science. If we do it this way, this is what's going to happen. But a case of you have to think about the human aspects of change, and especially with the faculty that gets used to certain ways of doing things. Very difficult to change. I hope that answers it. The jury's out. I don't know how this is going to turn out. But it sure was fun doing it. Yeah.
Just out of curiosity, was two-part question, I guess. One was onomasiological, the long word that you didn't want to drop earlier.
Yeah.
And second, in an era of boutique wars, would you offer some additional thoughts on what the future of PMA might look like if we do commit to boutique wars as being the future?
What kind of words?
Boutique.
Isn't that what you said? Boutique? Boutique?
Oh, boutique. Okay, yeah. Well, I just made that up. I don't think that's a concept. Maybe it should be.
It is now.
Yeah. But the idea of uniqueness comes to mind, right? So if you look at doctrine, it's about sameness, right? We want to train people to do certain standards, task condition standards. And yet, with these boutique wars or these very unusual circumstances, I call them strange events, strange situations. We tried this for the last 20 years. And we've adjusted, we've adapted, we tend to do it incrementally. I'm not sure that's a winning strategy. Maybe we shouldn't even have been involved in the wars to begin with if we had a different way of thinking. But this idea of uniqueness is really important because PME now is designed for mass production. It's still based on that old style mobilization where you want consistency and you want everybody to come out the same. In fact, when I started doing this at the General Staff College, I started going in my seminar trying to gear them a little bit away from the old way and looking at the right side. I had some students who were very upset because they said, you're not teaching me what my next boss will expect as a graduate of General Staff College. So if I go in there and say, no, I didn't get that. No, I didn't get that either. They're going to be upset and that you didn't teach me what the school said you're going to teach me and what was expected by the next boss. So they felt insecure and they felt vulnerable. Think about that. Because they didn't get the same curriculum that everybody else did. Now, fortunately, I did spend half the time giving them the straight stuff, right out of the books. But I spent about half the time trying to get them to think differently. So at the end of the day, they were able to pass the essays and the oral exams and stuff like that. So I cheated. But you can see that the structure was made to make them feel very uncomfortable with this. Okay? To think differently, to think uniquely, to try to develop a sense of knowledge production while they're active. Not going back to the book and saying, okay, how do I handle counterinsurgency? All these functionalist kinds of approaches to warfare. That answer your question? Hopefully.
It's a good start.
The comments that you made about NDU are interesting in that if we look at the larger military design movement, education has been done around the world for militaries at various PMEs. NDU is exhibiting a pattern potentially because we've had a similar problem at Leavenworth. Fort Leavenworth with School of Advanced Military Studies, Shimonave, 2005 to 2009, 2010. And then a massive shift from Bannock to Grigsby. And also a massive amount of outrage from the Army community in the 2008-2009 period, of which Colonel Martin was a SAM student there and could probably expand on it. And then also up in the north, in Toronto, the Canadian Forces College, our friend Dr. Paul Mitchell has had 2 mutinies of War College students that have done the same thing, that they've said, we are flat out not doing this, we reject design, we refuse to do this, we want to do what we think we should be taught here.
By the way, during that period is what brought us together, the 3 of us together. Right?
Yeah.
Because we were kind of the radicals.
So that goes back to just maybe a big overarching question is, do you see this as a
for lack of a better term for Kuhn, a paradigm shift maybe in how the military in the 21st century might be looking at complexity, challenges,
It could be.
organizational form?
It could be, although I'm also familiar with bureaucratic behavior and culture, organizational culture. And I think eventually it eats up any kind of radical ideas for lunch, and it just goes back, just like Sam's kind of went back, right? To the kind of traditionalist view. So I'm not optimistic, I'll be honest with you. But I thought it was worth a try, and it sure was amazing that it was that all these things aligned, that I could do this in conjunction with a very supportive chair, and in conjunction with a commandant who says, we got to get ready for war. We got to stop thinking like we've been always thinking. And it's a different kind of war. It's a different kind of competition. It's much more complex view. And the distinct lines between your foe and your enemy and the friendlies starts becoming very obscure. He subscribed to the idea of this array of competition now. We use the metaphor of war to talk about proprietary data now with China. They're at war with us on the business end, right? Economic end. So we have a lot of confusion out there because we're trying to use the old ways of framing war to define things that aren't familiar to us. They're strange. But we can't break out the old frameworks. So what we do is we analog those into the current situation. And this course was designed to try to move away from that, to try to say you don't have to do that. And be aware that that's what you're doing. So gray zone to me is another color metaphor, spectrum of conflict. And we just, on an eschatological view, we say the same thing with different terms. So our concepts really don't change. We just change the name. We look sexy, but it's basically still the spectrum of light that we use as a metaphor, and we say the same thing. And I think that we need to be aware of that. That's what we're doing. We can't get out of those concepts. We can't get radical and say, let's reframe completely differently and see this thing from an entirely different point of view. But we don't necessarily have to agree with. We have to consider.
Just real quick, building on that, I think there's a lesson in there for us radicals, and that is, and you could probably take it, draw some parallels between what's going on in politics in general for the last, decade or so. But a lot of the things that exist, traditions, et cetera, give us identity, give us meaning, and they're important. And they didn't just crop up, arbitrarily. And so to discount those things, I think that's a mistake that a lot of so-called radicals make. And we're all impatient, we want change, and to not take those things into account as part of our design, I think is a mistake, I guess.
Yeah, and I think he's profound in his statement here. It's kind of gets to what we're talking about. That events and situations don't convey meaning objectively from us. We create meaning on the situations and events. What we don't realize is we're using the same meanings all the time, and we're seeing things the same way, and they're not the same. So we can't step back and say, how can we design meaning in the situation? This is where design comes in. How do you take that as a very unique situation and then design your knowledge structure around it rather than taking your old knowledge structure and trying to impart it on that situation? Did I kind of address what you're talking about?
Yeah, and you just made me think of when I have addressed special operations folks, and I've come at them from their tradition of natural rebels, natural questioners, natural skeptics. A lot of this stuff is a lot more appealing to them, especially at the sergeant level and the junior officer level. If that's kind of where you're starting from, I think a lot of these ideas gain resonance.
Well, this is what makes Ben's foray into JSOU special, because I think the special operations community, although you have your own bureaucracy, you have a bureaucratic problem, things like that, rigidity, it is a culture that is more, I think, accepting of making sense of different situations and differently. And I'm looking at the courseware that Ben has come up with, and it's pretty amazing. I mean, and the exercises you run them through, it's amazing. And in fact, you can do it in a 2-week period is phenomenal. But yeah, you were telling me the Jaws story this morning. I watched all his films. I don't know if you've seen his film clips, but they're all cool. But the idea that he's the most inventive person I know that taking metaphors and be able to illustrate something that's very complex through a metaphor. So use the film clip from Jaws, which is, you got to ask Ben about it if you haven't seen it, and the exercises that he runs with his students to have them see things differently. And remarkable. I think that you're at the leading edge of this stuff. I know
Yes. Supervisor's right here, so.
But trust me, this guy is at the leading edge of this stuff. He's at the leading edge of professional military education, but no other institution is. In fact, I expect to fail NDU. So I have low expectations. Maybe I'll be surprised if you have. Anything else?
Got time for one last question?
Do I want to get into Ukraine at all?
Yeah, oh, please.
No. I think I have a couple slides here. Okay. So I was contacted by Office of Secretary of Defense, OSD folks, that one. See if I can get to those slides. Gosh, I gotta put it. Did I put those slides there? I think I forgot to put them in. Okay, I don't need them. I had pictures of some folks I was talking to last week at their National Defense University in Kiev, Ukraine. We were there under the DEEP program, Defense Education Enhancement Program. You ever heard of that? It's kind of a PFP, Partnership for Peace program. The Marshall Center kind of is the hub. Of course, OSD has the money. So the Ukrainians are struggling to become more NATO-like, more westernized. And so they have a transformative major general there. It's almost serendipitous too that I'm running across the same pattern here that I ran across my own school. But he's a very progressive major general who says, man, we got to change. We're in the middle of war here. We got to do some reforming while we're fighting. And brilliant guy, but he has a sense of, almost like General Jansen, he has a sense we're not moving fast enough, But he saw his logistics core in the National Defense University as being the most accepting of change, and they want to change. And they know there's a science and an art of logistics that they want to tap into. They're used to the Soviet system, as many Eastern European countries were. I know that Poland has come a long way. I know that Czechia has come a long way. And by the way, there were retired officers from those two countries there as well, from NATO helping, because they had been through the process. And so they want to become westernized in the way they do logistics, supply chain management, the business side of it as well as the military side of it. And so they wanted to create a master's degree program for their National Defense University. So we worked with last week with the officers on the faculty, with a colonel in particular who was charged with coming up with this course. And very receptive, highly professional officer corps. I was very impressed with him. Very well educated and open to reframing. And it goes, the old story of mother of invention. If you're under stress, it's the best time to transform because you have to do it. And they know they have to. And so to me, it was a lot easier doing things with them than it was doing my own, back at my own school, honestly. Because they were like, let's do it, And so I really enjoyed the relationship, and I think I have an ongoing relationship now. I helped them because we had, in the Army, we came up with a cooperative degree program with Virginia Commonwealth University and Army Logistics University. So I was kind of familiar with this idea of trying to bring the business side of it into their epistemology. So they were kind of focused all on the military side. And I was saying, no, you got to get the business guys too. So when I go back in June, I'm bringing my buddy from Virginia Commonwealth University who leads their supply chain management master's degree program. And I'm going to come from the military side, and we're going to try to help them craft a curriculum for next year for the master's degree program. Very Western view of logistics. But just thought I'd share that with you. They're in a tough spot because NATO doesn't want them in NATO because they're already at war. If they become part of NATO, what happens? Right? We're automatically at war. So they're just in a bind. I think Putin knows this. This is why he's doing this. Because he knows if they're already at war, how can they become part of NATO? That's my own opinion. I have no idea if that's the strategic view. But he's got 700 tanks now in occupied territory. 700 tanks. That's more than our Marine Corps has. Okay. He has troops down there in Crimea, threatening. And he has, guess what, he has troops in Moldova. Anybody heard of Moldova? It's a country right next to Ukraine. My geography is bad, but this country has 15,000 Russian troops on the border. So they're almost like surrounded. And you heard about the 3 ships being taken in that strait. So once they took Crimea, now they own the strait. And when the ships went through there, thinking they had freedom of passage, Russians said, that's our territory. This is now our territory. And they took the sailors and they took the ships. It's a very nasty situation. It's a conundrum, right? I guess the slide actually shows my title slide. It's a strange situation and strange events that are occurring. Any questions on Ukraine? I was fascinated by the whole thing. I love Kiev. Man, food is, restaurants there, I think I gained 10 pounds last week. Amazing food. And amazing people. I'm really impressed with Ukrainian people. Just fantastic. Any questions on comments? Anybody been in Ukraine? Do you concur with me?
No, I agree with you.
Yeah.
Most of your opinion I agree with the Ukraine. This is the very, very sensitive place.
It is.
It is, but I would say that those people probably well understand what's going on around. And we have hundreds of years difficult history with us as Poles, with the Russians, and we have those people are between the hammer and the hard surface right there. So definitely we only move in the one direction, not to make a conflict with the Putin, but to survive, and we have to help them. Maybe for the NATO, maybe I think that if we would join the NATO, it would not be automatically war.
Yeah.
I think that Mr. Putin and his team is pretty rational thinking player. You know, I assume this kind of course of action from early stage.
The complexity is amazing. I mean, like they're having an election soon in Ukraine. And the one who's leading in the polls is Russian friendly. It's like, what? Well, there's an older generation in Ukraine who like the old system. It says, you know, we're the ones that fall here. We're the ones that tick off our neighbor. And we like to be friends with them, and we like a better relationship with them. So they might actually win the election. They might boot us out.
Yes, I agree with you, but you know, you are also the Westerner, also the Americans. You still have something who absorb the young generation from post-Soviet countries. This kind of thing don't have the Russia, and China don't have kind of attraction things which you provide. I mean, you own the culture and freedom, and you can earn them. I would say in short way money easier than the post-Soviet countries. So this kind of things attract the younger generation. And this is your power. China never had such a thing. Russia as well. We never had the middle class party, middle class society. like you have right now, which is your power. And this is exactly the power of how we can keep this nation as a ULI.
Thank you for your comments, very insightful.